You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Well, hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole. I'm just so excited to be here in the 602 Club and excited to have back the one and only Christy Morris. Christy, I'm glad you're back from Neverland. I didn't know exactly when you would return, but perfect timing.
I'm actually a Wendy. Just wanted to share.
Oh, so sorry.
Yeah.
So sorry.
I realized eventually I was going to have to grow up and go to boarding school, I guess. So here I am.
Well, it is good to have you back. And, excuse me, Wendy, we're excited. We're going to be talking about something new that just landed on Disney Plus called Peter Pan and Wendy by the same director who did Pete's Dragon for them. But before we dive into the show, of course, you can find us wherever a podcast can be gotten. That means no matter where you're listening, you'll find the 602 Club, and you'll just want to make sure you subscribe, and you'll get the shows as soon as they become available. You can also give us a star rating and review on places like Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help other people find the show. You can also find us online, social media, on Twitter at the 602 Club, and on Instagram we're at the 602 Club TFM. You could also find us over on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM with the entire network. We've got the listeners only discussion group there as well called the Babel Conference. You can just find that by typing that into the search field on Facebook. We're over online at trek.fm, and you can see all of the different shows we've got going on. And last but not least, a really important thing, we'll be going over to Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM to support us to make sure that all of the podcasts here keep coming to you each and every week. We can't do this alone, so please give us your support over at Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM. So, Christy, obviously the story of Peter Pan has been around for a very long time. And there's many different ways to have had previous experience with the story, whether it's the animated movie, whether it's a play version, whether it's a recording of the play, those are out there as well. You've got the book itself. And so I was just kind of wondering what your experience with the story of Peter Pan was, and if you had any favorite versions of it coming into this new interpretation.
Sure. So I definitely was without a doubt the kid that was raised on the animated 1953 version of Peter Pan, and most familiar with that music and that storyline overall. But I still think my favorite has to be Hook from 1991 because, Robin Williams was incredible. Dustin Hoffman as Hook. And I felt like it still kept a lot of the main core tenets of the Peter Pan story, but had it reimagined in a cool way and in live action. And of course had the one and only Rufio, who can never be forgotten. So I think Hook is my favorite, but I'm most familiar with the animated version from 1953 and Hook, as far as stories. But I think I remember later I saw the early 2000s live action. It's not very memorable. What about you?
Yeah, I've loved this story for a long time. Of course, grew up with the animated version, and I've actually even seen a recording of the play. There was a famous woman, and I cannot recall her name, but she was famous for playing Peter Pan because, of course, at that time, the only way to do this and have somebody small enough that could also pull it off was to actually have a woman play Peter Pan. And so I've seen that, and then I'm probably going to be super unpopular, but I do not like the movie Hook whatsoever. And it's one of my least favorite films. And the reason is because they decided to insert the late 80s into Neverland. And I do not like that, because Neverland is this place that's meant to be timeless, and that movie is completely stuck then in the 80s forever, and it doesn't work. Neverland works because it's always this, it's pirates and, all of these things that don't have a time period on it, but anytime you watch Hook, when you go to Neverland, you're stuck in the 80s. And so now the storyline for Hook, I think, was really great in the sense of kind of when you talk about the idea of like reimagining and this idea of that if Peter had actually come home to the real world and gotten married and then kind of lost a bunch of, I think that's great.
Like the childish innocence.
Yes. Well, and just what it meant to be like, there's a part of us that, of course, need to grow up, but to not lose the wonder and the joy of life, And so, absolutely, I think that stuff is all great in that film. It's really just the production choices of, the Lost Boys basically being like a skater bike gang.
The modernization of it.
Yeah, exactly. I just hated it. I hate it. I couldn't hate it more because it just doesn't work for me. So, and all honest, so there was a movie that came out called Pan a few years back with Hugh Jackman. And that is absolutely not memorable and not good. But there is a version of Peter Pan from 2003, and Jason Isaacs, who was Lucius Malfoy in the Harry Potter
that
films.
is the one that I saw in theaters.
And so I actually love that movie. And to me, it's been, I think, one of the better adaptations because having read J.M. Barrie's book, it gets as close as I've ever seen to understanding what the actual themes of that are. And which is a question I wondered with you if you have actually ever gotten a chance to read his book.
No, I've never read the book and I've never seen the play.
Oh, okay. Well, more than anything for anyone who's listening, I would highly encourage check out the book. It is, we all kind of think, especially with movies that were done by Disney, that's the version that kind of gets stuck in our heads. And it's not a bad thing, but these stories, had a life before Disney took them on. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, and sometimes they can be different than what we expect. And one of the things with the story in the book is that it's quite different in the thematic elements that it's working at. And it's really deep and it's kind of melancholy as a story, which you wouldn't expect. And so, yeah, and to me, in many ways, the 2003 version is the only one that kind of picked up on a lot of those story elements. And so, because I didn't know, this is definitely something I want to talk to you about, because this movie not only makes changes to the story from what we know from like the animated version, but it also makes a lot of changes here from, the book, of course, itself. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to talk through those with you because I think some of them are interesting choices and some of them I'm really struggling with. So one of them is the fact that instead of Peter being the original Lost Boy, it's actually James Hook, who was the original Lost Boy. And they were best friends, which is an interesting choice. And were Lost Boys together. And then James misses his mother, and so Peter banishes him. And so that banishment leads to James getting lost at sea, picked up by pirates, who then raise him, and he becomes their captain, and they return to Neverland. What did you think about that? Because that's actually very big change from any version of the story that's ever been out there.
That was the biggest change that I could not get on board with this movie, because the idea itself doesn't sound like a bad thing. Like you're going, okay, if you're doing a retelling, a reimagining, because every time you're going to have a new iteration, something's got to be a little different to justify the retelling.
Right.
The initial idea of the two of them being best friends is not a bad idea. However, having the reason that Peter banishes him be that he missed his mother is not a good enough reason for a best friend to banish forever his best friend.
Yeah.
I think even though you are basing it on a kid that never wants to grow up, and it's about, not having responsibility and all of that, there's still a reason that Peter misses his own mother. So that also doesn't make it make sense to me. So yeah. I think that it's just a very thin story to base their entire relationship on, and that you needed something like the choices they made for Hook in the 91 movie to give Hook enough motivation to become as bad as he is, to where he is trying to kill people. And at one point in this movie does kill Peter, and thankfully Tiger Lily is able to bring him back. You know what I mean? Like I felt like I said, it was just a weak story for that.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about the way in which having them have this back and forth, and having Hook feeling betrayed by Peter because he's been banished for a thing that, and you would think that this is kind of a normal experience for anyone. And Peter can't deal with the fact that somebody would want to grow up, which, of course, it would be a way of reminding Peter that there is a possibility out there that there's something he's missing. And, of course, he doesn't want to be reminded of that at all. And I couldn't agree with you more that the problem with this is that it does not work very well to create a reason for Hook to be bad. Yeah. And a big part of that, I think, is because the original story has Captain Hook basically being the adult version of Peter who can't move past something, right? And is stuck in this loop. And in that loop, it's that he's angry because he doesn't have what he wants. And what Hook wants more than anything is in all honesty, is to find and to have love. Like, Peter has that from many different people, actually, which is why Hook is so angry with him. Everybody loves Peter, right? Like in the original story, Wendy falls in love with Peter. Tinkerbell is in love with Peter. Tiger Lily is in love with Peter. Everybody's in love with... Yeah, everyone is in love with Peter, but the problem is that Peter will not allow himself to grow up, and therefore he can never reciprocate those feelings in a way that, normal adults have the ability to do. And so I could not agree with you more that there is a massive issue here with the fact that you have these two characters at odds with one another, And to have one be willing to murder the other, and the reason for that murderous rage is because one banished the other from Neverland because they thought of their mother, and now I'm really ready to kill that person. It's a little weird and a little odd. And so I think you really nailed something that is a huge issue with the film. But on top of that, right, like, them having this relationship together also leads Peter to have a breakthrough at the end of the film, but then they won't let Peter just stay with, the darlings at the end. If you're going to change the story this much, I think it feels really disingenuous to have Peter make the decision he's had this major breakthrough with Hook. He's had this major breakthrough with this understanding of, like, what it means to be a friend and all these type of things. And then all of a sudden, we're going to regress him to not choosing to stay with this new family, basically. I did not understand that at all.
It did feel like there was something missing, even in that scene itself. That he and Wendy are having that deep conversation on the roof, and he's talking about how he does miss his own mother and doesn't really remember her at this point. And then it's like, well, great talk, bye.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait a minute, what happened?
Good talk. Yeah.
But I've decided I don't want to be here. Bye-bye.
Yes. I think... Yes, no, I'm so glad you said that, because you're absolutely right. Again, like, there's just something so odd about this choice, and it doesn't really, like, it doesn't seem to make sense. And I think you have, like, pinpointed exactly. It just feels like there's something missing scene-wise, or something that would help explain, okay, we've had this major growth for this character in a way that, because you're telling the story like this, Peter's never grown like this, or never had this type of growth. And so the fact then that he has, but then doesn't take it all the way, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Because in the original story, Peter just refuses to grow up. He refuses, that's not what he wants. He rejects it completely, and anything that has to do with growing up. And that's more logically consistent than having a character have this major breakthrough emotionally, which is a big part of growing her up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden being like, I don't think so.
Yeah. No, I'm with you.
Yeah, it's weird. The other, I would say for me, one of the biggest issues in this movie is the fact that the original story is about Wendy coming to Neverland on the cusp of womanhood, right? Like, she's on the cusp of making that massive change as a teenager where everything begins to change. You begin to have all of these feelings, and, like, everything's changing, and she falls in love with Peter, and Peter rejects that and can never give her what she wants because he can't experience that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this juxtaposition between, Hook, again, longing for that and seeing the fact that that's what Peter's rejecting, which makes him more angry at Peter for rejecting this very thing he's looking for. And of course, it's the very thing that as well leads Wendy to not staying in Neverland, because she desires, in the end, she realizes what she wants is that growing up. And so I was really bothered by this, because the way they write the story, where basically Wendy ends up becoming the savior of the film, also doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think it really allows her to have the emotional journey she needs to be able to make the decision in the same way that I think, Barrie wrote the story on purpose because it's one of the biggest demarcation lines for a teenager, right? Is that moment when you fall in love.
Mm-hmm.
And it changes everything, right? And so, but she makes this switch here to say that she wants to grow up. She wants to basically reject the idea of, staying a kid and living in Neverland and everything. But why? I don't feel like they do a great job in the movie of really explaining as to why Wendy makes that choice. I mean, she sees the fact that Peter's not growing up and all that. But then two, she becomes the hero of the film as well. And so I don't know. It felt disingenuous to me.
Well, yeah, I think that you rightly did hit on the biggest part of that, which is that I think that the story is trying to focus on other parts of the human experience of growing up and ignore the experience of romantic love for the first time and self-discovery in that sense. And like you said, that line of demarcation of maturity as well, of she is now going from no longer being a little girl, but to on her way to becoming a woman. And
right.
It is a stark difference. And that is, without a doubt, an undeniable part of that experience, is the experience of romantic love for the first time for another person. So I think that should have been included. And I think that you really feel the presence of that missing in this movie. Even just between her parents, it's I just don't get that feeling from any of the characters that I think it should have been there for. That, like you're saying, it also is then something that gives Hook more motivation because he wants that. And it also is clearly missing with, like we talked about, the other female characters in the original animated movie that were infatuated with Peter, but that he couldn't ever reciprocate those feelings because he's not mature enough, because he doesn't want to grow up.
Right.
I mean, that's why the whole scene about the kiss started.
Yes, exactly.
It's why even include it if you're not going to include the love?
Yes. That is a phenomenal point, because 100% by taking out the romantic subplot here for and not really a romantic subplot, but just the romantic plot between the two characters, you're actually hurting exactly what it is that you're trying to do. And so I 100% don't understand the choice here. And I think it makes the characters, it makes the characters weaker, because they're wanting to have them go on this journey, this arc, and yet they're taking away the things from the original story that actually help them do that. And they're not replacing it with anything that actually allows them to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And so I 100% agree with you. I just think there's absolutely something missing here. And it's a little bit frustrating that, whoever decided to write this story couldn't see that. And I think part of it, it's almost like it seems like a little bit of a willful ignorance to not be able to see how, by changing the fundamental nature of this, you're actually missing something. And so, yeah, I think it's very frustrating, because too, in all honesty, this really is I love this story, and I've loved it for a really long time, and it's kind of sad to see it lost in some ways. So I don't know. It's very strange. And I mean, there's a lot of other stuff here, obviously, that they change. They have lost people. It's not just boys. here, and
which
they've.
I don't know. I'll say that part didn't really bother me, just because also I think in Hook there were some girls intermingled in the Lost Boys, and so I feel like that term could be kind of all inclusive of like the lost kids. You know, they don't have to all be boys. But although I think that there's plenty of things from the 1953 movie that could be changed, and that in general Peter Pan should be a timeless story, I think that there are some things here that were changed so much from the core of what you would see in the book, or, overall that's the same from film to film, that here are different. It's like you're missing the fabric of what makes Peter Pan Peter Pan.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's really well said. I think that's really well said. I'm interested because the idea of that growing up is the next big adventure was really interesting, and it's something that I think as I look at the world today, and I see a lot of fear, I think more so than ever for kids in this idea of and being terrified really of growing up, and then because of that making very interesting decisions then about how and when and if they will grow up or choose to go on that big adventure. And I think there's something beautiful about even though I'm very frustrated with the way in which I think they don't quite get it right, that moment where her happy memories are all of these memories that haven't happened yet, where she's imagining herself basically growing up and all the things that she's going to do, I think was pretty powerful, because growing up is terrifying. And I think for everyone, there's so much that changes for all of us. There's so much that happens. I only know obviously what it's like to be a boy to grow up, but I can imagine for girls it's just as terrifying, maybe if not more. And so I really appreciated that this movie did allow us to see that growing up is a beautiful thing, and it is the biggest adventure if we will allow ourselves to go on that adventure.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that was really well said. I also enjoyed that scene. I think that was something that it did do well, and definitely gets across that although it is terrifying, it's something that we all remember from, being at that point ourselves in our lives before. And yet it's not as terrifying when you realize the amount of freedom that you'll have, and all of the options in the world are open to you. The world is your oyster kind of thing. So it's like still saying that there's two different ways of looking at growing up, that yes, it could be terrible, but you don't know until you try. And that the world of possibilities of the options you could choose from can make it a good thing.
Right. Well, and that the beauty of it is that you will get to have all of these experiences that you can't have if you're not willing to go on the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that, every journey we take as human beings is scary, and yet, because it's the unknown, right? And it's one of my favorite things about the way in which they use from Hamlet the idea in Star Trek VI of the undiscovered country, and they use that the undiscovered country is the future, and that is kind of what it means to grow up. It is the undiscovered country of our future, and but it's the joy of discovering it that makes it enjoyable, makes it fun. So yeah, I just, there was something just really, I think, poignant about it. And I think all of my complaints earlier were the fact that I believe that that's one of the big things to which J.M. Barrie is actually doing in the story, right? The story that he's telling is so much about this idea of growing up and the joys that happen because of us making the tough journey, right? And this movie, while at some points here doing, I think, a good job, it could have been better, especially if they had actually leaned into the way in which, Barrie gets there, which I think is really beautiful. And so I'm fascinated to see how you feel about the cast in this film. And I would say, specifically for the boy who plays Peter, because, Peter is the main character, or at least he's supposed to be. And how do you feel like this casting went for the character?
For Peter, it was kind of a disappointment. For me, I really wanted more from him, and I know obviously he's still very young, but I feel like we've had actors that were the same age that did a better job. Mm-hmm. And he got better toward the end, but I think from the get-go didn't have the punchiness that I want from Peter that we've experienced from previous iterations of really being a mischievous, very animated person. I think that this actor is playing it a little too solemn, possibly, and emotional, and really not getting across the core things that make Peter Pan the kid that everybody loves.
Right.
He's got to draw you in, and here I just feel like, meh.
I think that you have a really good point there, because one of the things that doesn't really, I think, work about the portrayal is that, and you nailed it, he isn't the kid who at first glance everybody thinks they want to be. You said, I think, a great term, solemn, and I think that's absolutely it. And I think there's a lot of fun missing from this film. Neverland and everything is there's supposed to be a sense of fun, and I don't think it's really here. And, again, the original story in the book is very melancholy, and yet there is a sense of fun and adventure and all that, and I think that this casting choice does kind of miss all of that completely, which is I don't know, it's just very strange. And so I think one of the things is that and maybe you feel the same way, but it did pretty much feel like, this movie's called Peter Pan and Wendy, and it felt like the movie cared more about Wendy than it did about Peter. And at least in many ways, I think the choice of actor for Wendy was phenomenal. She did such a good job, and I really liked her. I thought she had a real presence on screen. I think she really brought it to life in a way that is basically everything you'd want.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that she really gets across, especially the emotional scenes. She's able to kind of play that innocence of being a young girl still, and also that desire to take the next step in life and get that maturity and do what her parents are wanting for her later on. Whereas in the beginning of the movie, she's still kind of hesitant and likes being there with her brothers and able to really still stay a young girl and not have to fully grow up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that she absolutely gets everything across that you want to see with Wendy. I think that the only things we didn't like about the movie with her were due to writing, not due to her portrayal.
What I'd love to just kind of hear you expound a little bit on that then. What were some of the things you felt like with the writing with her that you just weren't a fan of?
Specifically the scene where she's supposed to walk the plank. You know, in the animated version, she's saved by Peter, but they're, you know, hiding on the side of the boat underneath the plank, and that's why you don't hear the splash. And he's still able to fly and everything. Here, they have her jump off, but then it's Tink that saves her. Mm-hmm. Peter can't fly anymore. And at some point, she catches Peter.
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels, not that it's necessarily wrong to do it that way, but that there's not really a reason to, more than anything, because she and Tink haven't really formed a bond enough to where I think that Tink is genuinely afraid for her life and will do anything to save Wendy. I would feel like she would do that for Peter, because she's known him probably her whole life. And then, you know, with Wendy rescuing Peter, it feels like, why would he need that? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like they let the movie dictate the plot rather than the plot dictate the movie, I guess is the expression. Like, we need this to happen, so we're going to take away Peter's ability to fly so that Wendy can catch him.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you felt?
I think one of the things that you hit on, and I think is 100% correct, and it really bothered me too, is that we've changed the whole conception of like Tinkerbell and like, you know, what's going on with Tinkerbell and who she is and all of that, and that is very strange. I think in this story, in the way it's done, it does not make a lot of sense. It does seem to be completely. It makes Tinkerbell a character who doesn't seem to have any motivations. You know, like, she is a character who has her own story as written in the book, and that story is her. Again, being a character who is in love with Peter and can't get that reciprocated, right? But she's loyal and to him and all of that as well. And so, and that's what creates the animosity between her and Wendy. You know, and all of these things that really drive the story. And again, she's left without a lot of motivations. Her motivation seems to be she really wants somebody to be able to hear her, which, again, they've taken this idea of that nobody really understands what she's saying. And I don't know, like, I'm just left speechless as to what they're trying to do with this character, because they took away all of her original motivations and then it's gone. And not that the actress was great.
Yeah.
As Tinkerbell, I had no issues with it. I thought it was fantastic. You know, everything they asked her to do, I thought she did well. It didn't work. And I was actually, as well, lastly, really excited that we had Jude Law here as Captain Hook. I thought he would be great in the role, and I love him anyway and things. Fantastic Beasts movies. He's so good in The Holiday. I mean, he can be so incredibly charming and everything. They give him nothing to do here.
Yeah,
like it's not good. Like, and it's not because Jude Law is bad. It's because the way this character is written is so boring and bland, and there's nothing for. I mean, he can't make it work because there's nothing to make work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was so disappointing when you get someone as good as Jude Law. I mean, you could have cast anybody in this role if you're not going to give them anything to do. Yeah, I mean, his motivations as a character, everything had nothing to do with Jude Law's portrayal of it. It was all about getting the plot correct and giving characters motivation and stakes to be able to earn what happens. And he didn't have any of that. And so it constantly feels like, especially with Hook, that you don't understand why he's so angry, why he's willing to go to the lengths of killing children or killing Peter Pan, or why he then constantly seems like he's aggressively questioning people to no end.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like, you don't get where he's trying to go with the questioning. Twice, I remember that, and I also was kind of sad, being such a fan of the animated version, that they bring in the crocodile and the clock thing twice a little bit, but it really isn't part of the story. And that was the thing that I loved so much about Hook, is that he's got this completely insane, irrational fear of clocks because of the crocodile and losing his hand. And it's like his time is running out kind of thing. So that was a major motivator before, and now it's reduced to barely being part of the story. So that made me sad.
Yeah. That's a great point. And I think you're 100% right in calling out the fact that the clock is this idea that time is, a predator, right? That seems to be stalking us, and this is what makes Hook such an interesting character in the book, is the fact that he is completely aware of the fact that his life is ticking away.
Mm-hmm.
That time is ticking away, and he doesn't have the things that he wants to have, and is completely unhappy and has become jaded and angry and all of these things, right? Which is the juxtaposition to the person who never wants to grow up. Mm-hmm. And this is what makes the story so much deeper than what we're getting here, and it actually gives an actor of Jude Law's caliber to actually do something with. Mm-hmm. And yet here we're really left with nothing, and it's actually pretty frustrating that's the case. And so I don't understand it. And so obviously I mentioned earlier, one of my main complaints with Hook is kind of the look and the feel of that movie, and the choices that they made in creating Neverland and all. How did you feel that this movie did in that, and creating this place that's supposed to be this magical island that every child would want to visit?
It is a place that no child would want to visit. It looks dark and sad and scary. I don't get the set design for Neverland at all. It seems like it's more of a place that you would go in your dreams in a nightmare, rather than this welcoming place where no one ever grows up and the sky always has rainbows and everybody wants to be Peter Pan. It's like everything is dark, including the place where the Lost Boys and Peter Pan live.
Yeah.
and doesn't seem like a place anybody would want to go, and that they're all just sad. So, yeah, I really didn't get why they went that direction with it. I think that in every iteration there was some element of that at some point, but that was always the scenes to accentuate Hook's character being the darkness and the melancholy and things like that. And otherwise, everything was very bright and upbeat because that's the personality of a child. Everything is great. Right. I don't have to grow up. Are you kidding me? Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think it is interesting to me, how much seems to be missing from this. I did enjoy the cinematography and everything of where they filmed. I thought it was really beautiful. But like you said, they don't really give us anything to hold on to in the sense of like, why would I want to go here? The whole point of this it should be that I want to go to there.
Right, like it's a child's dream place.
Exactly. And, I don't think, and I think you have really kind of nailed it, is like, that does not feel like that would be the case, is that you would look at this place and think to yourself, I would want to go here. And the fact that Peter wouldn't want to leave it, right? Like, and so, there's just a lot of strange choices that I think, happen in the film that I was also perplexed by, and part of that had to do with this design work of what we're doing here. It was just very odd. One last thing I did want to ask you about this was, with the animated version, of course, you've got all of these wonderful songs that are in the story, and so there's a lot of music, and very very popular music, right? That has become part of the cultural zeitgeist. From you can fly to all of those type of things. And so how did you feel like the composer did in kind of creating the soundscape musically here, especially since they do refer to and there's some of the refrains in there from the original animated with some of the songs, especially You Can Fly, making their way into the movie here just through the score.
So I liked the slight reference to You Can Fly. I didn't catch any other reference to the original Disney music other than that one. I think that there's some from the 1953 movie we can do without. But I think that You Can Fly is essential to me anyway. So I was glad that was in there. But I think that missing a song like Wendy's Your Mother and Mine, something with some emotional depth, would have been nice. I was kind of surprised that they took away the song like that, but put in songs for the pirates. So I felt like it was okay, but it wasn't really the kind of thing I was looking for Peter Pan. I needed something more positive and uplifting and emotionally moving.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. I think that there is, it does seem like there's a lot missing here when it comes to just creating a sound for this world and the again, I think it comes down to what you were saying with the look and the feel of the film is creating this place that feels like a place you want to be, you want to visit, you want to be a part of, and then none of what they're doing here, I think it's just not as good as you would hope it would be. I think it's fine, but it's not bringing the story to life in a way that's really inviting, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. Which is disappointing because, it's such a, the Disney musicals do such a great job with that. And I will also say, too, one of the things that really sets, I think, the 2003 version apart is the way in which it was able to create an incredibly beautiful piece of music for when they're flying to Neverland. It's gorgeous. James Newton Howard did the music for that, and he just created a theme that if you hear it, it'll get stuck in your head, and it's really beautiful, and it captures the vibrancy that you want, right, when it comes to the idea of going to Neverland, the joy of it.
The wind in your sails and the pixie dust under your bow.
100, yes. No, that's a great, I think that's just a great way to put it. So, well, I'm really interested, Christy, where you're going to go with the ratings here for Peter Pan and Wendy.
So I do feel that I really gave it every chance that I could, and that I'm open to reinterpretations of stories that have been around a long time. I mean, clearly the novel came out in the early 1900s, as they say. And then the Disney movie that I knew first came out in 1953. So it's been around for quite a while. So obviously there's going to be retellings of this story over and over again. But here I think that if you're going to name it Peter Pan and Wendy, there's certain things that still have to stay the same in order for it to be part of that universe and to make sense that it's these characters, and that there's some major things here that were not kept the same that should have been. And I felt like you and I both felt that way. And that, not having something as big as the maturity you get through experiencing romantic love for the first time featured at all is really surprising to me. Mm-hmm. And that there's still a way that you can give Wendy her own independence and agency and include that.
Yeah.
Just like they did include the version of her teaching the boys and girls about being, having a mother or being a mother possibly one day. And I think that you needed a stronger actor to play Peter.
Yeah.
You've got to have somebody that captivates people, and especially kids, and makes them want to be him. And I think here it was just kind of boring. Same thing about Neverland. He said it's got to be a place that every kid is dying to go. And here It feels like, why would anyone go there? Everyone's trying to kill you and it's dark.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there's just a lot of things that I really wanted to be better, and I gave it a chance and it just didn't hold up. So ultimately, I really end up kind of on the low end on this one, and I'm going to give it a 2.5 out of 5 missing crocodiles, because he was there for a minute and then he was gone. I think that someone needs to speak to the writers and say, maybe next time there's a couple of things that you should have kept.
Yeah, I think that's all really fair. And, this movie ended and I was just kind of mad. I think it's not a good film. I think that I have no problems with kind of taking and doing something interesting. Again, this is where I think Hook takes the idea, and instead of just recreating Peter Pan, it tells a story based off of the story we know. And then it goes in new directions, which is great. My favorite live action Disney retelling is the one that they did for Cinderella, because it finds a way to honor everything that we love about that story as told by Disney, but tweak it in a way that makes it feel different from what you've seen before. So good on them with Peter Pan for not just doing a straight up remake of the animated story, but by changing the story here, they've actually lost what made the story good in the first place. And it's frustrating. It's not good. And I'm going to give this 1.5 out of 5 stars. It's just not worth your time. Just watch the animated remake. Or maybe we'll have some recommendations for people, Christy, that people will want to catch up with. So what are you going to recommend to everybody here in the 602 Club?
So I have been rewatching something lately with my husband that we just get so much joy out of every time we put it on, and it's all on Hulu, so we can pick up anytime and rewatch it. But we really enjoy watching Modern Family. If you've never watched it, I definitely recommend checking it out, because it talks about different people's family experience and how it all combines together, and that everyone can have a different kind of family, and that's okay. Especially speaking as someone who has several cousins and nieces and nephews that are adopted. I think that, you don't have to have biological children to love them just the same. And that sometimes things happen that kids can't control, like divorce and remarriage and whatever, and that there's still a way to make a family out of it. So I think that it's a really positive way of showing that families come in all shapes and sizes. So,
yeah.
And it's really funny. So, yeah, if you haven't checked out Modern Family, please watch it.
Nice. Well, I'm going to recommend that everybody go, instead of watching Peter Pan and Wendy, go watch Peter Pan from 2003. It's fantastic. It is so much better than this version, and it is one that actually honors the book and the play as originally written. And I would also suggest going back and reading the book, because I think you'll be so surprised as to just how deep the story really is, which is one of my favorite things. So both of those are much better uses of their time than Peter Pan and Wendy. But Christy, if people wanted to catch up with you, where would they find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at Bespin Bell. And of course, over on the Skywalking Through Neverland network, I did a show with Amanda and Teresa called Sabers and Spells. And then, of course, you can find me too in the Babel Conference sometimes. So what about you?
Well, you could find me all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02. Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero are all the places you will find me. Places I'm most active. You'll also find me here on the network outside the 602 Club with a bunch of different shows. We've got Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek, The Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and that's our 30th anniversary rewatch right now. We've got Warp 5 about our 20th anniversary rewatch of Enterprise. Saddle Up, which is coming right back here in June, so you'll get the new season as we talk about that, and you can catch up with all of our old episodes. And of course, Star Trek Picard just ended, and we talked all about Season 3 on the Artificial Tango. Over on the Nerd Party Network, I've got 2 shows. One is called Owl Post, did that with Dre Kaufman. Every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And then last but not least, you can find Aggressive Negotiations, which is a Star Wars podcast, what I do with the great John Mills, and we just have a blast talking Star Wars all the time. So, but thank you, as always, so much for joining us.
And all it takes is faith, trust, and a little bit of pixie dust.
Thank you.